Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org. I'm Anne. I'm sure you remember what it was like when you were searching for help, maybe for your husband, hoping to find the right program or therapist. That's why I started podcasting. I supported my husband through 7 years of pornography addiction recovery, and not one therapist during that time told me I was experiencing emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion. I didn't want any other woman on the planet to be in the dark. If you're like the majority of my listeners, you're experiencing the type of abuse that's invisible and difficult to wrap your head around. Your husband is using porn or having affairs or lying to you, and you're getting the same bad advice about how to improve communication or your relationship. If you need support from women who totally understand, check out our daily group session schedule at btr.org/group. We'd love to see you in a session today. One simple, anonymous way to help spread the word is to click, follow, or subscribe to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery podcast on your favorite podcasting app. While you're there, every 5-star rating helps make this podcast more visible and will help save other women from getting the wrong kind of help, like a couple program that will make this type of abuse worse. For those of you who follow or subscribe to this podcast, thank you so much. Your support means so much to me. Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org. This is Anne. I have a member of our community on today's episode. Cece is here to share her story. Welcome, Cece.
Hi, Anne. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so grateful for women who come and share their stories. If you're interested in sharing your story on the podcast, please contact podcast@btr.org. I'm so honored to talk with you. All right. So, Cece, you're divorced now, but let's start at the beginning when you met your husband. Can you talk about how you felt at first?
So I went to a Christian college, and there was a lot of the purity culture stuff going on there. I had grown up with an alcoholic dad and kind of being the scapegoat in my family of origin. So my self-esteem was kind of at the bottom of the barrel, unfortunately. But he and I were friends, and we got to be friends the first week of my sophomore year in college, and he was a freshman. He was actually studying to become a youth pastor. So when I met him, I thought, oh, he's like just this nice Christian guy. He had a girlfriend at the time, and I was not really like interested in him like that, but we really did hit it off as friends. And I didn't see like any red flags at that point in his character. But interestingly enough, he was dating a girl in my hall, and it was actually an abusive relationship where she was abusing him, which made me think he could never be that way towards someone else.
Really quick, what made you think that she was abusing him as you're observing this?
I would see the way that she would talk to him, and she actually hit him a couple times. So it was very serious, and other people were witnesses to those things, even when I wasn't. So
the reason why I ask that is we don't know what he was doing to her.
A
lot of times when you see a woman doing that, it could be that she's resisting abuse and you don't know what happened before that.
That is possible. But just from what I observed, it seemed like he was just the people pleaser, and he was always just bowing down to her every whim. And that's what it looked like from the outside. And once they broke up, he actually pursued me, and I just was very caught off guard at that point and thought, oh, well, I mean, he's one of my best friends, and let me just think about this. But he waited a long time for me, really respectful of like all my boundaries, especially like the physical boundaries were really important to me because I knew I wanted to wait even to kiss for engagement, because I'd had some bad experiences in the past in high school where guys pushed boundaries, and he really didn't do that. So I thought, oh, that's a green flag. But I guess a couple of the red flags I saw before we were married, he was very emotionally immature, which I didn't really know what that looked like at the time. I think just because I couldn't even spot the red flags, having grown up in an abusive home, I thought, oh, this is just how guys are. And at one point, he called me just out of the blue and was like, hey, I don't have any food. I need you to take me to the store. I said, oh, well, I have something going on today, or I have to study or something. And he would not take no for an answer. I said, can't you get someone else to take you? Can't you call another friend? Oh, no, you have to take me or else, and he just really put so much guilt on me and said it was a food emergency.
It's a food emergency. Sorry, that's funny. It's a food emergency.
Right. And nobody could take it but me. So I just went ahead and did it. but I felt really just taken advantage of. But otherwise, he was a gentleman. He seemed to do everything right. But I think it was love bombing. But honestly, it didn't seem like he was trying to manipulate at that point. It just seemed like he was very immature, I guess. And so, he would mirror me a lot too. I was really into poetry, and I think he just took all of my interests and thought, oh, wow, she's such a cool girl. I want to be interested in everything that she is. And it made me think, we're into the same things. Like, I think we're going to be the perfect match.
Mirroring is the worst. I did not realize it back when I was dating before I got married. So I would be like an open book and men would be like, me too. Me too. Now I like to sit back. Well, not that I date. I do not date. So don't get that impression. But when I meet people, I like to kind of sit back and ask them what they think first.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm not going to mirror them. I'm going to be like, cool, I'm glad you like that. I don't like it, but congratulations. I'm not going to be like, me too, if I hate it.
Yes, for sure. And he did tell me actually before marriage that he had a porn problem. Now, I did not know what that meant. I thought, well, guys struggle with lust. That's what I'd been led to believe. So it's a struggle for him, but I think he'll be able to overcome it. So I was very naive at that point.
So you get married at some
hmm
point. When do things start to go south? Like where you're recognizing, oh, something is very wrong.
So we got married right after graduation, and it was about a month after we were sitting on the couch, and housework had become an issue already. It was like he would leave all these messes just for me to clean up, treating me like a maid and stuff. And I thought, well, I guess this is just a sacrifice I have to make being married. But I was very frustrated. And so we're sitting on the couch, and he spills this bag of trail mix on the couch. And I was like, oh, I was at my breaking point that day, just with all his messes. And I was like, well, I guess I'll go get the dustbuster and clean this up. And he hit me with a flip flop.
What?
Isn't that crazy? He took his flip flop and hit my leg and made this red welt on it.
Not like gently.
No, I mean, it was like he wanted to punish me. And immediately I just said, we need to go to our pastor about this. We have to tell somebody. I am not going to put up with this. Because I knew it was only going to get worse. That was really a wake up call. So we went to our pastor, and he said, you need to go to anger management. And he set him up with an anger management class. And then he said, you need to have a plan for where you're going to go if he continues to do this. You need to go figure out a neighbor or somebody you can go stay with immediately.
You're resisting abuse immediately. You're going for help immediately. You're like, this is not right. So you're doing your job, which is resisting abuse. So the person you go to for help says, put yourself in the position where this could happen again and have a plan if it does, rather than don't put yourself in this position again. Oh.
Definitely. My husband went to the class, and he actually was able to largely stop the physical abuse. There were a few more like rage incidents where he would pull back the shower curtain if I was in the shower and yell at me, or he would just restrain me, things like that. And I would fight back sometimes, but I quickly realized this is dangerous. I'm not going to fight back. But then after learning some of the techniques, I guess he stopped that form of abuse. And I think I was confused because I thought, well, okay, the abuse has stopped. We're good. And he's really becoming a new man and making changes. But soon after, I got pregnant with my first child that November. So we got married in June, and then in November, I got pregnant. And at that point, I was teaching, I was working full time, and I was so tired. You know how in your first trimester, it's just, you're wiped out. And so he was still being a slob, and he was actually in school going through a different program at this point and just working part time. So he was home most of the day. He wouldn't do any laundry, he wouldn't do any cleaning. I was like holding down the fort basically with just doing all the housework and working full time and pregnant and tired. And I remember I was folding a load of laundry one day just crying because I was thinking I have no help at this point, and I just felt so alone and lost. But I also had a D-Day at that point, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but I think I did find porn again.
I'm going to
And
pause you, right? If someone is listening to this podcast for the first time, I just want to define D-Day really quickly. D-Day stands for Discovery Day, but clearly it's also a double meaning because it's the day that your world sort of falls apart. So you've got a D-Day in that you're discovering porn.
So some people have like one major D-Day. I had dozens probably. And I think that was kind of the death by a thousand cuts. At that point, I had actually heard from one of my friends. Her husband was in SA, which is a program for men with sex addictions, and she was in S-Anon, which was the complementary program for wives. And she was telling me how much it helped both of them. And I thought, okay, maybe there's hope here. I mean, he was just totally checked out. It seemed like being very selfish, not really caring what I had to say. And I said, you need to go to SA and you need to get a sponsor. And he did it. So I thought, okay, things are going in the right direction. But although he would pay lip service to it a lot, telling me how much he had learned and how much it was helping him, I did not see any changes in like his actions. So it was discouraging, especially just seeing how he was putting basically zero effort.
So this whole time you're resisting the abuse, you're trying to get help, you're trying to figure it out. In your efforts to resist abuse, did you reach out for help with clergy or with couple therapy, anything like that?
Yeah, I was trying to get help from the ladies in S-Anon, but it just didn't really resonate with me. There was one incident that really sticks out to me that year. I came home from work unexpectedly because he was home during the day, and I walked in and I was thinking, this is weird. He was naked and he had a ruler out. And I was like, what the heck is going on?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'm not doing anything. I said, are you talking to someone? And he said, no, I swear I'm not talking to someone. I'm being dumb. This was just really stupid. I was just trying to figure out what size I am. And at that point, I was like, who did I even marry? Who is my husband right now? And I just drove back to the school in tears and was just totally checked out the rest of the day. I don't even know how I got through it. That was really a big turning point for me, thinking he's got a serious problem.
Being obsessed with your penis size is definitely a sign of sex addiction for sure. So, of course, you didn't know that at the time, but like, how alarming is that?
It definitely was. Like a lot of those other incidents, I just thought I have to make this work somehow, even though it just became more and more traumatic. I think being married to somebody who I didn't even know who he was or what he was doing when I was not around.
And knowing that that was how you were resisting, you're resisting any way that you know how, but you don't know how to define it.
Yeah, that's true.
Is realize that you were trying to figure it out the entire time. And then you run into these roadblocks all the time. So when people ask, like, why didn't she get out? Be like, she was trying to get help, but she went to a therapist and the therapist told her to communicate better. So
Yes, for
it's
sure.
so hard. What do you think is going on at this time in your efforts to make yourself safe? What are you telling yourself?
I think at that point, I was telling myself, he's really got a serious problem. He needs somebody to get through to him. And I just hope it's going to be his sponsor or his counselor at that point, because we had started going to individual and marriage counseling. With our marriage counselor, it seemed like she would have been really helpful, but she never got to really the root of the problem. And I don't blame her because I don't think she was informed about what was going on. But there was one session that I just remember her talking about trust and how important that is. I was like, we need to go for more of this, because she had been talking about fondness and admiration. It was like this kind of triangle, and I can't remember who came up with that, but it was like a couple's triangle where you were getting closer together and closer to God, and you had to go up the triangle. But I was thinking, we are not even at the bottom right now because of how he's actively destroying our marriage. Yeah, definitely did not feel very helped by that. With my individual counselor, I think it was helpful for me to start unraveling my family of origin stuff, because I thought, I want to save my marriage at all costs. I don't want my trauma to be a factor in this. I don't want to get in the way of anything that we're doing together. My marriage was my number one priority the whole time. And so I thought, I need to heal from my past.
We have found that most marriage therapists don't get to the heart of the problem. And then even if they do, let's pretend like the therapist is like, okay, he's abusive. The solution is also not going to work, because they say, okay, why are you abusive? And they'll give reasons. Oh, my childhood trauma. Instead of saying, no, there are people who experience childhood trauma and they're not abusive. So no, that's not why you're abusive. Oh, this happened. No, that's not the reason. You chose this. So therapy isn't good for abusers. Their choices over time to have created this type of character and to give them validation. Like, now, it makes sense that you're abusive because of your childhood trauma, but now let's not be abusive anymore. That's not what they need. They just dig themselves deeper and deeper instead of realizing I made choices over time that were based on entitlement. I have a thinking problem that is not due to anything that happened to me. I am just a misogynistic, exploitative abuser, and I need to change. Even if you did get to the root of the problem, they're abusive, how would you help him with that? By
That's true.
validating his childhood trauma? Because you had childhood trauma. Were you abusive? No. Did you lie? No. So the whole therapy thing for an abuser does not make sense.
Right. And if somebody would have told me that I was living with abuse, it would have made so much sense to me. Like I could have figured things out so much faster. I remember during our marriage counseling, and I told the counselor this. I said, I'm not suicidal, but I honestly wish some days that one of us would die so that I could get out of this misery.
Yeah, that's very common. What did the counselor say?
She just empathized with me and said, oh, yeah, this is really serious.
Did she say you are abused?
Never. When my oldest was one, I got pretty sick because my immune system was not good at that point, just with all this stress. During that illness, I remember having this sudden clarity like, this is not of God. What's going on? And I really believe that He spoke to me in that moment when I was feeling so physically terrible. Somehow I could hear the Holy Spirit better. And He was like, this is not what I want for your life. And this is not a marriage that glorifies me, is what I believe the Holy Spirit told me. I just remember thinking, okay, I need to come up with a plan. But that was pretty much as far as it got because I was so ashamed. I didn't want to go back to my family of origin. I didn't want to have to rely on them at all for any help. And I was also thinking, there's so many people who supported our marriage, and what would they think if I separated from him? So I just felt very stuck, and we eventually got back to the status quo, and I got pregnant with baby number two. I did have more D days after that. There was one specifically at a friend's house. We were having a Super Bowl party there, and I just grabbed his phone to look something up. It was just, I wasn't even thinking. And I saw that he had searched this girl's name in the search bar, and I just snapped him. I said, what the heck is this? I pulled him outside. I was so mad. And he just had this way of placating me, I think, whenever I would find stuff. So he just groveled basically. He was like, I'm so sorry. I'm struggling right now. And it made me feel empathetic towards him because I thought, well, he just has this problem and he really doesn't like it. So I started to feel myself pulling away from him emotionally, of course.
You were resisting. Yeah.
Yeah,
That I just have this problem and I can't stop the eliciting of empathy and almost pity. Abusers don't mind it when people pity them. Like, I hate it. If people pity me, I'm like, oh, I'm fine. Leave me alone. It's not something that I enjoy. It feels bad to me. But they're like, oh, good. And I think it's because they use it to manipulate people and it's gross.
for sure. So I just wasn't really sure how much longer this could last at that point because I knew I'd always wanted a bunch of kids and to live the stay at home mom life. But I also just started to realize that maybe our marriage was not going to last. I thought it's got an expiration date at some point. I can't keep having kids with him when he's doing this, but I wanted more at the same time. Probably the biggest thing that happened that year was that we changed churches. We just didn't agree with some of the stuff they were doing at our church. So we wanted to change churches, and we ended up finding ourselves at a super conservative Baptist church. It felt really safe there. I had stopped going to my S-Anon meetings and I had started to look into more of the traditional marriage materials, not anything super fundamentalist, but more complementarian ideas. I thought, wow, maybe I can at least improve my marriage. Even if I can't really get him to change, at least maybe I can have a halfway decent life if I follow these kind of rules.
So at the time, you're thinking maybe complementarianism is the answer?
Yes. All the women there were stay at home, homeschooling moms like I was. And so I thought I fit right in here. And I got really into the trad wife kind of movement. I started following all those social media accounts like baking bread, gardening. I think looking back, that was a flight response where I was trying to escape the situation almost.
You're still resisting it because you're thinking, if I
Right.
do this, it will stop it, which is a form of resistance.
Yeah, if I just live my life largely separate from him, maybe I can survive. And I would be working 13, 14-hour days just at home doing stuff and I loved hosting holidays and decorating the house and making it super shiny and clean just because I was trying to keep myself occupied and keep myself fulfilled doing stuff.
You're trying to thrive in the sphere that you think you have power
Hmm.
over. So if you can't be the best stockbroker, right? Because you're not a stockbroker, you're like, I'm going to be the best host. I'm going to be the best homeschooling mom. You're trying to thrive in whatever sphere that you can. And they're also promising things. They're saying, hey, if you treat a man this way, he'll treat you really good. If you have dinner on the table, if the house is clean, if you give him sex, that's what men want. And so this is the answer to your problems. They're also suggesting to you that this is a way out.
Yes, this was also in combination with when I started setting some serious boundaries around sex because I was like, if I'm just going to live here and just be a house slave, basically, I'm not really a wife anymore. Sex just seemed gross when I didn't want to do it. That was a whole other thing. It was like he would say he wanted to, and then he would start a fight. And then I would be so confused because I wouldn't be in the mood. And then he'd be like, you're never in the mood. And I'm like, you just started a fight with me. It was like he was covertly withholding from me. And that was very disappointing to me, honestly.
Also, making it your fault that he didn't want to have sex with you because he was busy using porn and masturbating and whatever else he was doing. So he actually didn't want to have sex with you, but he wanted to make that your fault.
Yes. And I figured that out after I got out, looking back, like, oh, wow, that was why he did that. I could probably count on my fingers the number of times we had sex, but I got pregnant one of those times, not on purpose. I was really excited, though, to have a boy because my first two are girls. It was a time of hope in my life that I'd get to have a son. And it seemed like he started to make changes at that point too, because I read a book that was helpful for breaking spiritual strongholds. And it really seemed to help me in my life. And I was like, you need to do this because if anything's a spiritual stronghold, it's porn. He read it and he seemed to really want to change after that. He was much more intentional with me, actually wanting to spend time with me instead of just doing his own thing all the time. Then, when I was 25 weeks pregnant, I had another D day and I saw that he was looking up a girl on Instagram. And I thought, what is going on? I mean, I thought we were good now. Apparently not. So after that, I was just existing and just numb and thought he is just going to do this no matter what. So it was this new level of having to accept it, even though it was super depressing. So then it was Christmas and I was doing my housewife thing. We had family over. I was trying to clean the house. He was just sitting on his butt doing nothing. I could tell he was a new level of checked out. I didn't really know why, but my intuition was telling me something. He wouldn't come to bed with me ever. He would stay up until 3 a.m. And just this thought creeped into my mind. Could he be cheating in real life? But then the other part of me was like, he would never do that. So I was confused. I got him some lingerie for Christmas, thinking maybe I can rekindle our romance. So I put it on, and he did not even look at me. He was just bored. And I was thinking, if he's not attracted to me at all, we've got serious issues. That was the turning point. I did start listening to BTR at that point, and it was honestly a little too much for me at first. I just had to take a long time to digest everything. So that was a good resource for me, and I started gradually listening to it more. I had been starting to follow on Facebook for a month or so because I was at the end of my rope. And it was just very eye opening to read all the stories there and thought, oh, this is my story. And just the fact that these guys did not give up porn for any sort of extended period of time. They would keep finding stuff over and over, even when they thought their husbands were in good recovery.
Can you talk about why it was a little too much for just a second? Was it that it was too painful to hear other people's stories, or you just didn't feel hope? Or...
I thought you were a little too feminist for me. I don't think that now, but I did think that before. I thought, well, not necessarily the guest, but like Anne is just so honest. I mean, it's a compliment. But I just thought you were so hard hitting with the fact that like this is abuse and these men are going to do what they're going to do. I'm like, well, yeah, but some of them might want to change.
So at the time, you're like,
So,
Anne is too feminist. She's kind of too extreme in her this is abuse stance-ish.
right.
That is true. A lot of people think that about me. And I'm like, yeah, it's true.
Yeah, just being a trad wife and starting to listen to your content was, I mean, it was so good. It was what I needed.
Going from trad wife to BTR was like whiplash. Yeah.
Right. So I think I felt like a chandelier had just fallen from the ceiling on top of me when I thought about my marriage. This has crashed down and I don't even know what to do. So I sat my husband down and gave him the choice between me or porn. And I was like, this is it. This has gone on long enough. And I was totally serious and I was crying and I said, this is a crap sandwich either way. That's what I told him. I said, I can't believe I brought 3 babies into the world with you if I have to just leave. And I said, so you've got to quit. So he actually did a disclosure. I don't know if it was a full disclosure because we didn't do a polygraph or anything. And I know polygraphs aren't the be all end all either.
This is with a CSAT, a certified sexual addiction therapist?
Well, eventually we did go to one of those, but this was before we had our appointment with them.
Okay.
So he just wanted to do it. He said, I have to tell you everything. I got to get it off my chest.
This is just a non-therapeutic one. He's just like going to tell you.
Yes. And so I thought, okay, let's just sit down after the kids went to bed. I know I needed to know everything. I found out he was playing pornographic video games on the TV when the kids could have walked in any minute. I was like, wow, I need to get myself and my kids out of this situation if he continues to do this. This is crazy. So I was very nauseated and had to stop partway through, but I did want to know everything. So we came back after that and I found out a lot of stuff. So I wrote up this contract. It wasn't official or anything, but it just said, I promise to like fully provide if things don't work out and continue to pay for everything they need and let her continue to homeschool and financially support her. So he signed the contract and we also put accountability software on his devices, like so I could see everything he was doing.
Part of me thinks, and this might be why you didn't like listening to me on the podcast in the beginning, but here we go. Part of me thinks that you said, okay, porn or me. And he was like, I'm going to tell her everything and then she's going to kick me out. And when you didn't do that, he was like, shoot, now I got to lie to her again.
That's possible.
Because why would he tell you at that point and not at a different point? And also, why does he just volunteer it?
I don't know.
That's my thought. That he thought, I'm going to tell her everything. She'll be so disgusted because she'll be like, you're obviously choosing porn. I'm done. But instead, then he has to lie again because for some reason, they cannot just be like, you know what? I want to use porn. Cool. Let's get divorced.
Yeah.
Like I've never seen an abuser do that. If you're listening and you're thinking, I'm going to just confront him and tell him it's either porn or me, he will always choose you because he's going to look terrible if he chooses porn. So he's never going to do that. It's a good way to try to resist abuse, but abusers don't work like that. They're always going to lie because abusers always have to manage their image.
That is true. I will say this is the first time that I think there was any force behind my boundaries because I was kind of bluffing other times. Just I didn't have it in me to leave. But at this
Mm-hmm.
point, I was done. I was like an
Mm-hmm.
animal caught in the trap, just wanting to chew off its own leg. So he seemed to change for 5 months, and it seemed like he was actually repenting and like wanting to have a relationship with me. It went from him just having no interest in me to really wanting to to be close, but it was like a pendulum swing. Like, oh no, please don't go. I had just been through the ringer and couldn't handle any more betrayal. But 5 months later, he had a relapse, and he did like a drip disclosure, which means that he told me part of the truth, and then he said, actually, I lied to you. There was more, and then more came out. And that was doubly traumatic for me. I was just zoning out, just staring into space when he was telling me this and could barely handle it. Basically, you shouldn't be my accountability partner because you're my wife and you need to get back in your place. And I thought, wow, it was just a total 180 from what he'd been saying before. Before he'd been saying, I've not taken my role as a husband seriously and I need to humble myself. But then it was like, get back in your place, woman, just right after that. It was so crazy. So I was like, no, I'm not doing this. And I kicked him out of our room. I told him he needed to go sleep in the guest room, and he got in bed with me and would not get out of bed. I was like, get out! And I knew it would create a very toxic situation for our kids if we were sitting there yelling. And I was like, I have to get out of here. So I went to my mom's for 2 weeks. My mom is like the one family member that I am close with. I reached out to all of his accountability people, just like, my husband is not okay. I need you to check up on him. He has a brother. He and his wife were on my side this whole time, which was a total blessing. And I still talk with them. But his brother called him and said, you have to confess to your wife what you did. And so he called me on FaceTime and told me that he was doing the video games again. And I thought, there is something more. I mean, his eyes just went black. It was like a demonic kind of thing, which I couldn't have explained it until experiencing it. It was wild. It just seemed like his soul was gone at that point. And I was having these panic attacks at different times. It was the weirdest thing. It was almost like I had left my body at that point. He came and visited the kids, and it was awful. I felt this strong urge that I needed to get away from him. I told him he needed to move out before I came back to town because there was verbal abuse in front of the kids, and I knew that he couldn't be in the house with us. My oldest, she drew a picture of us shouting at each other, and it said, Mommy and Daddy are not getting along. And that just really broke my heart. And I thought, we need to be apart. So he moved out. And so when I came back into town, we set an appointment with a CSAT, and he went to an individual counselor as well. And when I went to his counselor with him, I was so desperate to be believed. I was like talking so fast, like, please believe me, this is happening. And he's like, why are you acting like this? Just looking back, he should have known that this was an abuse situation. It was so obvious that I was so panicked and everything trying to tell him the story. And I said, I just want someone to believe me. It was bad. I was finding stuff. I was finding videos that he was watching, different social media accounts. So now he's got an accountability partner from the church, which was the assistant pastor, which was a total joke because I was thinking, okay, nobody does better research than a betrayed wife. This is pathetic that he thinks he can help him. And I have my own suspicions about the assistant pastor and what he's into. But I was finding all this stuff, and the people from church wanted to sit down with me. And the pastor and assistant pastor and their wives were there. And the pastor says, I think your husband is doing really well. It seems like he's really taking things seriously. And I said, you want me to show you his accounts? I said, this accountability partner stuff is a joke. I said, the only person who is going to really know what he's up to is me, and he's not up to anything good. So I wanted him to go to porn rehab. That was my line in the sand. I said, I will not consider getting back together unless he goes to rehab. At first, they were on my side. They were like, yeah, maybe he needs rehab. But then the assistant pastor turned it back around on me towards the end of the meeting, asking me, why do you feel the need to be so controlling? And I couldn't even with them at that point. It was awful. I knew I needed to stop going to that church at that point. I just cut off communication with them. Thanks to what I've learned on this podcast largely, because I thought, oh, this is going the same way as like everybody else's churches. So I'm grateful for what I had learned at that point.
What are you thinking about BTR at this point?
I was thinking I am all ears at this point.
If you're like, should I get services at BTR? The coaches at BTR are incredible. They take a woman exactly where she is. They don't push women. They don't push their agenda. They're just like, I'm here to help you get to safety. How do you want to do that? Everything that you've done in the
Yeah.
past is resisting abuse. How do you want to move forward? I'll talk to victims in real life. They'll come to my house because they're part of my community, a church or something. So me in real life, I'm looking at this person in the eyes, and usually they don't love it. They're like, this seems kind of too extreme. But almost 100% of the time, they come back like 6 months to a year later, and they're like, if I would have done that, I would be in such a better position now. And I always look at them with empathy and give them a hug and say, I am you. I did that exact same thing. I was like, no, I'm going to do the porn addiction recovery thing for a while. I'm going to go to couple therapy. It's almost like you have to try it for yourself to realize that it's not going to work. When I first started BTR, I thought, I can cut that off in the past. I can be like, don't do it. That is what I do. But I've come to realize that because it's your marriage, because you want to resist through saving your marriage, and because all of us care, that we almost just need to know for ourselves. So that stage of trying it is an important stage that most victims are going to go through, and it's not our fault. Because the manipulation is so intense from everywhere, from the abuser, from clergy, from therapists, that it's hard to be like, okay, I'm going to go against clergy, therapists, my family. That's a really hard place to be. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
It was hard feeling like my entire church had turned against me and like I was just the outcast. My pastor's wife, she was part of our homeschool co-op, and I just felt like she was looking down her nose at me every time I was there with my kids. But it was an easy decision to say they are not trauma informed. They're not giving me any kind of good advice. They were telling me that I needed to suffer well and look at Job and how he suffered, and you need to be like him. And I was just done at that point. So I ended up going to my old church, and they were very supportive because one of my friends who had walked through the same thing, she told me they were really helpful and understanding. Everybody was very kind whenever I went and welcomed me back. I also quickly found the safe people. And it was hard at first because I didn't know who would really be understanding and who wouldn't. And so I felt like I had to over explain myself to everybody at first. But then my intuition got a little bit stronger over time, and I could really tell the friends that I know who are in healthy marriages, they were shocked when I told them what was going on. But the friends who I could tell were in unhealthy marriages and just staying there were the ones who gave me the advice. You need to keep trying. I couldn't take any more of that. My husband's parents actually offered us a marriage intensive to send us there and pay $4,000 or $5,000 for it. And I said, if you're going to pay that money, you need to put that towards his rehab, because that's actually going to save our marriage. Oh no, you need a marriage intensive. I was like, okay, whatever. And he didn't really want to go to rehab. So he moved back after a month of being out. He said, you're not believing me, you're not trusting me, so I'm going to move back in.
What?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that crazy? You don't trust me because I was finding stuff still.
How could you not trust me when I've never done, because you've done it in the past? Like, what? Like, they don't make sense. Sorry. It's crazy.
Yeah, he moved back in and I moved to the guest room. We just basically had a parenting schedule, like where he would parent at this time and I would parent at that time, and I'd always go in my room and lock the door if he was home. So in the fall, he had a couple of moments of clarity where he was like, oh gosh, I'm about to lose my family. But then he would be back to where he was before the next day. And my panic attacks and stuff were starting to even out at that point. I was like, I'm just going to observe and see what's going on. At one point, I said, I just want to sit down with you and pray for you. I don't know why. I just think that God is leading me to do this. And looking back, God was trying to open my eyes at that point even more. So I prayed for him and just cried. And I was like, God, I just love this man. Please change him. And help him to just see what needs to be done to save our family. And he said, "You want to go out to dinner?" And I said, "Sure." So we went to dinner, and I was trying so hard. It was like there was this glass wall between us, and I was pounding on the glass, trying to wake him up, get him to understand my point of view, but he would not hear any of it. And he was in the complementarian BS, like, "You're my wife, you need to just be submissive." I could tell he was obviously taking a lot of it from what he heard from the church. So that night I had a TIA stroke. It's like a mini stroke. It doesn't usually impact you long term, but it is a warning sign that you might have a stroke in the future. My head felt like it was going to burst. It was like I couldn't even formulate any thoughts. It was the weirdest feeling. I just felt like my brain was shutting down. And afterwards, it was really scary. After that night, I just knew I had to set a permanent boundary that I would not discuss any type of relationship stuff with him at all, because I thought it's going to be the real thing next time. So I ended up moving to a camp. We stayed there for 3 weeks, and it was kind of fun. It was like a camping trip. That was the first time that my kids ever spent a night away from me. And that was really hard. I was still nursing my 18-month-old. And so my boobs were leaking. I cried so much. But after that, it got easier. And I started using the time to just refresh myself and listen to helpful resources and meditate on scripture. One of the most helpful scriptures to me was Malachi 2, just talking about how much God hates when men are unfaithful to their wives. It was so encouraging to me. In those days, I would just open the Bible and God would always lead me to the right passage. That was one of the main ways that I was able to regulate my nervous system. And then I interviewed 2 lawyers. I was just so broken over having to do that, because in Tennessee, we don't have legal separation. You either stay together or you file for divorce. So without filing, I could not get him to move out of the house. And I also couldn't get child support or anything set up. So I knew I needed to file. But the night before I went to the first lawyer's office, my son knocked our marriage license off the wall and the frame broke. And I was like, wow. And then God led me to this passage from Psalm 81 that was referring to when he delivered his people from Egypt. And it was talking about how he set their hands free from the basket and delivered them. And that was just amazing to me, thinking, wow, okay, I have heard God and I'm peaceful about it. So I went to the law office and eventually he got served. He said he wanted to contest the divorce, even though we didn't have any assets to divide. So he just made me waste a bunch of money on the lawyer fees for a contested divorce, even though we didn't go to court at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting because he was almost like gleeful when we were talking about the stuff that we were going to divide up. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, we'll do that." It was weird. It was like he was happy. And I thought, I have made the right decision. He just wanted me to do the dirty work, which I was devastated to have to do.
My ex was like that too. He was so happy to get divorced, or at least he acted like it, which was so weird.
So weird.
Yeah.
One time I was getting the kids ready for co-op, and out of nowhere, he came into the room and he said, "I'm going for 50-50 custody." And he knew that was something that would really devastate me, because I'd always been a stay-at-home mom and I'd always done all of the stuff for the kids. And I thought, what are they going to do spending half their time with him? That would totally disrupt their lives. And he caught me so off guard. I freaked out. I said, "Are you kidding me?" It was in front of the kids. I'm ashamed to say I yelled in front of them. But he said, you're going to be calm. You're not going to show your triggers. My ex is real big on homeschooling. And I said, "We won't be able to homeschool because you work a 9 to 5. So we'll have to put them in public school and daycare, which is going to be very expensive because we would have 2 that would need to be in daycare. And you're going to be paying a lot more for that than if I just take them to work with me or just work around their schedules." He always spiritualizes everything. I said, "God's going to be good and faithful to us no matter what. So I'm not worried either way.
That's what we teach in the Living Free Workshop and Message Workshop.
Totally. And then I just poured out my heart to my safe people when I could get away from him. We worked out the parenting schedule. We have 70-30 now. But one thing that I remember from that month, he moved out as my middle child. Her birthday party was that month. And we already had it planned and everything, and we were both going to be there. I was thinking, oh, how's this going to go? He started drama at the birthday party, saying that I was planning to take the kids out of state because I was planning on visiting my mom at one point. And that was just the first time he ever found out about it. And he freaked out in front of everybody. And I said, I'm not doing this again. We're not having birthday parties together if you're going to continue this. And he would guilt me, like, you're breaking up our family. And I would just go and cry before. But I just had sudden clarity, like, he's breaking up our family. And I would tell him that. I would say, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're the one breaking up our family, and you know it. And he just stopped after that. It was crazy what happened when I actually stepped into my power and started just calling a spade a spade. We got to Christmas. It was peaceful. We split time with the kids. Things were a lot more peaceful once I started having firm boundaries with him. And I eventually moved out. He actually bought me out of the house because unfortunately I had no employment history or anything. But God provided. My mom helped me get my rental place, which I don't know what I would have done if she hadn't helped me. But God really provided the perfect place for us. I was so sad to leave my house and all the work I put into it. But now we live in a 3-bedroom house on 2 acres because I posted on Facebook and someone responded and we found the perfect place. My kids, I can just send them outside. It's just great. I've just been able to build a business. God has just provided every step of the way because it's very public now. It's just out there. I'm divorced because my husband was a porn addict. I've had other moms reach out to me from my different social circles, even the ones who are still in their marriages, just suffering, which I feel terrible about. And I'm going through the same thing. You're the only person I've told about this. It's just so common. It's everywhere. God has confirmed to me over and over that I made the right decision. And I've learned to just sit with grief and journal about it and talk to my safe people.
Does it help at all to know that the good parts weren't actually good? Do you know what I mean? That they were grooming and that they were part of the abuse? Does that help, or how do you feel about that?
You're right. At the same time, I view myself as alone in those memories. Like, I was having a good experience, but I was alone. So even saying my wedding vows, that was me being my honest self. But he was not being honest. His heart was not sincere in it. Actually, he remarried just a few weeks ago. I feel really bad for his next victim. He definitely picked someone very vulnerable and naive. I've tried to be friendly with her just in case she ever needs to reach out.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell yourself?
I've thought about that question, and I honestly don't know if there's anything I could have said to myself that I would have listened to.
I think that's such a good answer because that's how I am too. I just have to say, yay, because I'm that same way. Like, you listened to BTR, but at the time you thought the best way to resist abuse was a different way.
Right. There's so much wisdom in it, but you have to be ready to hear it.
Mm-hmm. I would not have listened to myself either. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. You are so brave. You are so strong. And it's so good to hear that you're thriving and doing well. And I really appreciate you sharing today. Thank you so much. If this podcast is helpful to you, please help us reach other women by following or subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating. Thank you for helping other women find us. If you've already purchased a copy of my book, Trauma Mama, Husband Drama, please circle back and give it a 5-star rating. A lot of women are searching for books about betrayal trauma on Amazon, and rating Trauma Mama will help them find this podcast, which is free to everyone. Your donations keep this podcast going. Go to our website, btr.org, scroll to the bottom, click on Support the BTR Podcast. And until next week, stay safe out there.